Hey guys, today we're going to work on the back of the MAME cabinet, and just temporarily I have this old piece in that has red laminate on the back. Probably remember we got the hole cut out in here. That used to be the upper part that mounted on those cleats right there. It used to have a speaker mounted in it. Well, I've just got it in there temporarily, just kind of squaring up the main cabinet because I'm just slightly out of square, and I just wanted to see if a piece that was cut real true to the inside dimensions would kind of square the cabinet up, and it does seem that it does that, but it kind of needs an additional piece up top to hit the corners. If it's mounted in the corners, that'll square these up to 90 degrees on each corner, and so the cabinet, it's acting like it's just a little bit racked. I think just a little bit racked, well, that way, and it's just because, you know, it still has just a few panels in it, and it's not keeping it square that great. So if I can put a panel up here near the top that comes down no more than about a foot, and then put an additional panel at the bottom that does the same, and they're really square and they're exactly 2 foot wide in dimension, then it should square this cabinet up. So what I'm thinking about doing is taking this panel here and cutting away right here and right there to get rid of the speaker hole, and making 2 panels. There'll be a panel made from this top piece and a panel from the top piece. And I think there'll only be maybe about 10 inches or so, but that's enough. And we can mount the one piece down here to the bottom, and that should square up the bottom corners. And then take the other piece and move it all the way up to the top of the cabinet and mount it there. And those will be permanently in place. They'll be glued and probably screwed in place and everything, or, you know, possibly even use finish nails or something. Depends on what kind of cleats I'm going into. And then from about here, you know, 10 to 12 inches from this piece that will be in place all the way down to the piece that will eventually be in place right down here, we'll have one panel that's maybe, you know, close to 4 foot or so in length, and that will be a removable panel, and you can take it loose so you can work on the monitor chassis or the guts of the PC that's going to be running MAME on the inside. So right now we're just going to take this piece and probably cut that off and that right there to make 2 pieces. And if it looks good enough, we'll use this. If not, I do have some more plywood in the next room, and I can just, you know, scrap all this, use it for other stuff later, and we'll start fresh with brand new plywood. If we do use this, we'll have to do a little bit of sanding because there was some splintering along the edges when we took this apart, and right over here. And that would also let us clean up some of these spots that are on here where something was spilt, and we can come back and repaint the whole thing. Alright, I've went outside and cut 2 separate pieces out of that one large panel that had the speaker hole in the middle. And right here, if you take a look, you see this is a piece that I have in temporarily as the bottom part of the cabinet. And it's the piece that had a little bevel cut along this edge here, and that was just where it was mounted as the panel above the monitor on the old cabinet, the old bowling cabinet. And let me pan back a little bit. If you look up now, I've just put this piece in temporarily, but you see that's the center of the piece that I just cut. I cut away a section on this part that was about a foot or so, maybe a little less, and then a section up here on the upper part that we're going to use for a piece on the top of the cabinet. And this right here, this round hole in here, was for the speaker that was originally in there. I just have this in place. I was just testing a theory there. I thought maybe if I put an extra brace under this monitor shelf that it might help sturdy up the cabinet, and it has. I'm not necessarily going to use this piece there permanently. I may just cut another piece like that that's exactly 2 foot just to give a little more rigidity to the cabinet. And that's just something I was testing, so don't pay too much attention to that. And then right above it, you can see there's another panel there. That is the piece that I've cut for the upper part of the cabinet. I'll pan up here. Let me move the camera up a bit so you can take a look, and I'll show you where it's going. This piece, now there's the side that used to be glued to this cleat on each side and screwed in, and of course there's a little bit of chipping wherever I broke it loose from the cabinet. The other side has a really nice looking piece of red laminate. It really doesn't have any flaws to it. I wiped off a little bit of dirt that was on it, and it's really perfect. But if I use it, that laminate side out, which I can do that on this piece and the piece at the bottom of the cabinet, I just don't have a matching piece to be for the largest removable back piece that's going to be in here. I can't match that red laminate. I could probably go find something that's pretty close, but I don't have a panel to cut from that's that big and in good shape. So most likely I won't have to use the natural side, even though it has a little bit of glue residue and some chipping from the edges. I can sand that and probably paint this whole back piece black or something. So anyway, this will eventually mount in here. And right now I can't flush it all the way in as far as I want it to go because there's a cleat here and on the opposite side that is only about a ½ inch from the edge of the cabinet, and I want this to recess into there 3/4 of an inch. But eventually this piece is going to go in there like that. It's going to help square the cabinet up once it's glued and nailed or glued and screwed into place. So that'll be like the top part of the cabinet then. And like I say, I can sand this and pretty it up a little bit and maybe paint it. But between this right here and that lower piece that you've seen, there's going to be about a 4-foot section, maybe just a little less, maybe 3-foot something section in between here and the bottom, and that'll be a removable panel. And the lower piece down there, it does have a bevel to it. I'm thinking about leaving that bevel, and then the piece that I cut from the new piece of plywood could have a bevel that mates up to that, and that way the piece, you can actually set it into that bevel and lean it in, and it'll just kind of help keep it secured, and then have a few screws along the sides on each side of it to hold it in. And we'll have to build a cleat system inside here and inside here that's got a 3/4 inch recess, so that those panels will sit into there and be able to be screwed into them. But right now I've got a piece of plywood in the next room, and I need to cut this big piece here. It's going to be, like I say, anywhere from 3.5 to 4 foot. You know, I'm going to have to measure because it's not exactly 4 foot opening that I'm going to be leaving. And it's going to be a little tricky cutting because it's almost exactly 4 foot wide. It was a 4x4 sheet of plywood, and I cut a small section out of it to help build the control panel. But the problem with that is, not just because I cut on it, but because my table saw isn't massive and it doesn't have big massive guides hanging off the side of it and all. It's real hard to cut a large sheet of plywood on it. So I think what I'm going to do is use my skill saw here, and I'm going to snap a chalk line on it, and I'm going to lay the plywood down and just kind of cut close to 2 foot width. I'm going to do like 2 foot and a couple of inches or so, and I'm just going to do my best with the skill saw, but I want a really good square cut on that when this is completely done. So the extra inches I leave on there, I can attach kind of a ledger board or a guide board onto that piece of plywood and put it on temporarily with screws. And I'll probably use these pieces from the cabinet. These are some old pieces I have here, and they are really, really good and square, and they have a good sharp edge on them. I can attach that to the side that I do a temporary cut on and run that against the guide on my table saw, and that'll make the final cut so that this piece will be exactly 2 foot wide, and it'll fit in there. And you know, it won't have any gaps around the edge or anything because, you know, using my handsaw, because you can get off when you're using a handsaw. It's pretty hard to do that even if you have a board guiding you or anything like that. So, but that's the next step, and before I put this piece in the top end permanently and the piece in the bottom end, I want to get that piece cut and just kind of dry fit it all together and see how it looks. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay guys, here's the piece that we're going to cut the big, like 4 foot panel out to make the main part of the back of this cabinet. So it's going to cover from right there where that piece is on the bottom on up to maybe about 10 or 12 inches from the top once we get this top piece installed, that piece right there. And we're wanting to cut, we want to keep that factory corner and edge and that factory corner. And we know those are real good and square. Done checked them with the framing square. And the only new cut we're going to have to make that's not factory will be right along here. It'll be about 2 foot down from that corner. We're going to come down to, well, let's see, maybe about 2 foot, somewhere along there. And we got to rip this across there with the table saw all the way down. And we want to make sure we get a fantastic cut. And the problem is, this is such a big sheet. With the 4 foot span, you know, it was a 4x4 sheet, and we cut that little bit off the edge right there and used a piece of this to make, I think, the back of the control panel box. And I just needed to use that because it was a good piece and I didn't have any other that length. But the thing is, you can't, since this has the cut on it and everything, you obviously can't run it against a guide on the table saw, you know, to make you a good rip down through there. And even if this was cut all the way down, I ripped this, I think, with my circular saw. And so it's, you know, it's not very true down through there. The cut's not very true. and you want it really true. So what I'm going to do, I am going to use my circular saw again, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to, let's say this is the 2 foot mark. Well, I'm going to come over an extra about 2.5 inches or so. I want to back over about extra 2.5 inches. And I'm just going to snap me a chalk line on there, or throw me a straight edge on there, and just cut the best I can without going crazy with the skill saw, and just cut down through there and just make kind of a quick cut, just kind of a rough cut, and cut the main extra off of this that needs to be cut off. And what that will leave us with is the back piece we need plus about 2.5 extra inches. And then what I'm going to do is install a couple of pieces of wood like this off of the old cabinet, and I'm going to install them in such a way that it gives the side of this piece of wood where I've made the kind of rough rip down through there with the skill saw, it's just going to give it a really nice straight edge to ride against the guide on the table saw. So we'll come over, and it doesn't really matter how far over onto the meat of the wood we are, as long as we don't come so far that we're at the 2 foot mark, because that's where the blade's going to cut it at. So we'll probably come maybe 1.5 inches into that excess that we leave. We leave 2.5 extra inches. We come in maybe about 1.5 inches, and we just use these screws that are already in here and screw it to this piece of wood. And there's going to be another piece down there that butts up to this, and it's going to have a perfect straight edge hanging off the edge of the board to ride against the guide. And we'll just adjust the guide until we get dead on 2 feet for the width that we're going to be left with, and we'll just line the blade up with 2 feet, and we'll just make a rip down through there and just use this nice crisp edge on this piece of wood here, since we know it's really true and straight, and the other cleat that we install on the lower part. And that'll just give us something to ride on, so that the cut that we do make at the 2 foot mark will be perfect as we can get it. And so hopefully it'll be at least about as good as the factory cut, and that should be a lot better than just trying to rip it, throwing a chalk line on there and then trying to rip it with the skill saw, because my skill saw blade, it doesn't have that many teeth. It leaves kind of a rough cut anyway, and it's just too easy when you're doing it by hand to just kind of wiggle left and right, and I want this to look really good. So I think that's the best bet. If I had a larger table saw or some type of extended guides on the one I have, I might be able to do it, or some people make something called a table saw sled. I think there is a type that you can make to cut big pieces like this, and I've never tried to fabricate one, but I might have to do that in the future. They're actually very good for cutting very small pieces of wood, but I think there is a type of table saw sled that you can fabricate out of some wood, and it'll let you cut big sheets like this, and you don't have to have the guides on your table saw to help you do it. So maybe in the future I'll make something like that, but for right now we're going to take this out on the porch. We're going to rip it down kind of roughly with the skill saw, and we're going to install these cleats on it and run it across the table saw. I might do a little footage of that outside, but maybe not too much. It is a pretty day though. I mean, we're just into February, about 3 days, and don't know if you can see my temperature thing on the porch outside, but it's probably not focusing, but it's about 62 degrees out there. It's uncommonly warm really for today, but it's pretty nice outside, so take advantage of that and get out there and do a little work. Okay guys, we're out on the porch, and I've set up some pressure treated 2x4s that I had for another railing project around the side of the house that I haven't finished, and I just laid 4 of them out so that I can kind of keep this sheet of plywood balanced on it, so that when I cut through it, neither the piece I'm cutting away or the piece I want to keep is going to fall and cause the blade to bind up or anything, and that just makes it a lot easier to cut across through there. And so I set it up so that about where you see the tape measure, right around in there, is kind of where a cut's going to go. It's going to come down through the center of these two right here. So I want to measure over 2 foot and then add like 2.5 inches, and it's going to fall right in this area. It'll be about 26.5 inches. And I'm going to measure the same down here and put a mark on each end, and I'm going to use my chalk box and I'm going to snap a line across there. And then I'll just try to follow that with the skill saw. I'll have to kind of get down on my knees and go across there with the skill saw and just make a pretty accurate cut. And then I'll install those, really good cleats with a good sharp edge on there, and I'll throw it up here on my table saw right up above, and we'll use those as the guide so we can make a nice clean cut at the 2 foot mark. and then we'll just have a little scrap piece there. But that's just the way I'm getting around, you know, trying to cut this big sheet, because I'll show you what I'm talking about right quick. But on my table saw here, you can see, if you look here, the blade, there is maybe about a foot or a little more to this side of the blade that you can put your guide bar here, and you can slide it out and back, and you can, you know, count off inches however much you want. You can put that down, you can put a piece of stock against there and run it through the blade. Well, we need, you know, somewhere between like 16 inches to 2 foot to be over here and run against the guide to cut off the other 2 foot, and we just can't do it, because I mean, even if you take this guide off and you put it on the other side, I do have an extension over here on it, but the extension, I mean, it only goes out to maybe real close to 2 foot, and that's about it. And you can't even put that guide over there. You can only put it on this part. It locks in right here on this bar in the front. You can put it maybe to right there, about as far as you can put it, and you can lock it down. And see, that's only giving you maybe 12 to 14 inches there from the blade to the guide. So there's just no way, you know, to get a good sharp edge. You could take this guide completely off. You could throw that piece of plywood up there and just try to run it through by hand and just hope you get a good cut. And, you know, be careful, because if you slide it left or right and it binds on that blade, it's gonna do damage to the wood, and possibly you could hurt your hand trying to do that. So it's not a real good idea. So the way I'm going to try to do it, I just hope, you know, just kind of a jury rigging way of doing it, but maybe it'll work out okay. So I'm going to put this back in the tripod and I'll get ready to make the cut. Well guys, we made the cut. Everything went pretty smoothly. I didn't show you beforehand, but I did adjust the depth of the blade. I made it come through the plywood probably about 1/2 inch, and I knew that the 2x4s are 1.5 inches thick, so there'd be no danger of cutting through the boards on my porch. So went through there just like butter. Doubt very seriously that's a super straight cut because I just flew through it. But you know, even though it looks good here on camera, if you get close you can see there's probably a little waviness to the lines. And we're going to straighten that out when we put it on the table saw. So maybe I'll show you some footage of doing that. Okay guys, we're just about ready to make our cut. You can see here, that line that's been snapped is at the 2-foot mark. So when we cut this with our saw, we need to try to leave that mark. Just leave it. So I snapped that right at the 2-foot mark, and if you can see, we've got these 2 cleats installed. And they're just going to give us almost like we've got a neat factory edge to ride along, because they got a really good cut to the edge. And what I did is I came in from the 2-foot mark, 24 inches across this plywood. I came in 3/4 of an inch, and I made marks. Now let's see. You can probably just see my pencil mark right there. You can just see the pencil mark, and the plywood is dead on the edge of it. And I made 3 other ones. I think there's one right here that's hidden barely by the wood, so I'm dead on it. And then there's another one right there. You can just see the pencil mark. That's exactly 3/4 of an inch over from the 2-foot chalk mark that we made. And I did the same thing. If you follow the chalk on up, you see a little mark there, and we've got the wood dead on it. And there's 3 more of those marks. Let's see. There's a mark right there, 3/4 of an inch over, and near the end of the plywood there, you can see is a tiny pencil mark there, and the wood's dead on it. So what that does is the 2.5 inches width of these little cleats here that we've installed, that's just like adding 2.5 inches from that 3/4 inch mark on over, and it's like giving it a new edge, so we don't have to depend on the edge that I cut, since it was just a rough cut. And we're hanging over by maybe 3/4 of an inch or so. And this right here has got a perfectly straight edge, and it's going to ride against our guide here. When it rides against our guide, as long as my guide and my blade is square, and it should be because I adjusted it not too long back, then we'll get a nice square cut, and this board will end up nice and square. And we'll just have to take it and bump this guide in to the point to where the blade is going to cut just on the left-hand side of our chalk mark and just barely leave the chalk mark. It might make it disappear, but you don't want to make the blade center right over the chalk mark, or you'll probably cut off like a 1/16 of an inch or so. And you know, we want this dead on where it just barely leaves the chalk mark. So what I'll do is I'll get the saw adjusted for that, and I'll let you see me make the cut. Well, to the thanks of help from my wife, I think we got a pretty good cut that time. It looked like it kind of bobbled around a little bit when we went to the second cleat, and it just was sticking to the table saw just a little, but it looks like it stayed right on the line, so hopefully we got a good cut. We'll go in the house and find out. Well guys, we got our piece cut and cleaned up our mess outside, and we got the back piece inside the house. And it looks like it turned out really good. I would set it up here and show you how it fits, but that does currently have a bevel to it, and it's going to be a little hard to hold on to it without it falling. So I'm going to remove this bottom piece. fits real tight. I'll just show you. We'll probably use this side because it's a very pretty side. This side right here has got some cracks up here on the upper part. Don't know if I've got it where you can see the crack. But right here there's some cracks, and just where they laminated these sheets of plywood together to separate individual pieces, there's some little chippings of wood that got in there and got pressed in the press with it. So we're going to make sure that's turned inside. And there's just a slight bow to this too, kind of bows like that. You know, I'm showing exaggerated. It's not very bad, but if we put that to where the bowed part kind of sticks out, then when we fasten it with whatever type of fasteners, it'll just pull it flush once we have cleats installed on the inside of the cabinet. That's the way it's going to sit at the bottom perfectly. Once there's a piece in there, of course the piece will take its place. This part right here up top is not sitting real flush. Let me see if I got it in camera view. I think it'll hold itself. If not, I'm going to be in trouble in a second. But if you can see along the bottom there, that's the way it's going to sit. It is flush at the corners and everything. And we don't have any cracks up the sides. It looks like it fits real good and snug, just like I wanted it to. When you get up here, of course, there's a little bit of the profile sticking out. It's because these cleats in here, I haven't chopped them down yet. These cleats I'll probably come back with a Dremel tool. You can't see the way the light is right now. Maybe you can see this one. Yeah, this cleat right here. We just got to chop about 1/2 inch off of those, and it'll let this sit all the way in flush. But right now it just shows about a 1/4 inch reveal. See how when you go down to the bottom, it's sitting all the way in. That's exactly how it's going to look when it's installed. But looking at it right now, it looks awful good, really, just sitting there like that. Got that big spot up top. That means I'd have to cut one large piece to fill in there, and that means buying one more piece of plywood, maybe a 2x2 sheet. But probably still stick to my plan of putting a piece up here to kind of square up the upper part of the cabinet, and then one at the bottom, because that needs to be installed permanently to keep this cabinet nice and square so it doesn't rack. But as you can see, though, it looks pretty nice on the back of the cabinet. Kind of closes it in, except for that upper part. So the next video clips you see will probably be when I get some cleats installed and start mounting this piece and some of the other pieces in place. That piece that I took loose from the bottom, we may not use it because I do have some scrap plywood that can take the place of that, and it would be nice to have it match the wood grain on the back of this. So if I can come up with enough scrap to redo that piece and the piece that's going to be up top of the cabinet, then I'll just do it with that same type of wood grain right there, like what we used on that panel for the speakers and the back panel.